It's time for the Blue White Breakdown Podcast. Bob Flounders here with Johnny McGonigal. Johnny, we are inching closer to a couple of big days on the Penn State football schedule. Penn State Bowl Media Day is coming up, and we're going to get to hear from the coaches, the players, the new OC, Andy Kotelnicki. See, I got that right.
Yep, there we go.
The former Kansas OC. But after that, next week, signing day. So Penn State, James Franklin, as we talk here on Tuesday, December 12th, James is, I think, busy tying up some loose ends on that note. And then before you know it, Johnny, it's going to be Christmas, one of your favorite holidays and mine. But then we get to get on a plane, go to Atlanta, hot Atlanta. We were there last year for the Auburn game briefly. And it's going to be time for the Peach Bowl. And that rascal, Lane Kiffin, who's got a strong social media game when it comes to Penn State news. We're probably going to get to hear from him. But it's December, right? And they still don't have a new DC to replace Manny Diaz. A lot to get to. As you know, I think as Penn State fans know, Johnny, I am a pretty significant Dallas Cowboys fan. And I know that you are not. But I think if we wanted to, we could talk about the Penn State Eagles game. We're not going to talk about that. Let's just start with Penn State football. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, Bob, let's not talk about Eagles Cowboys. Let's because we want to keep this thing civil. We're here in person.
Yeah.
Here in the PennLive
Studios.
PennLive Studios. So let's keep this thing civil. We'll talk about Penn State football. There's so much going on. We can talk about the Birds and the Cowboys if they play in the playoffs. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You mentioned all those dates, right? Bowl Media Day coming up on Friday. You've got the early signing period, which is basically the main signing period next Wednesday. Will Penn State have a defensive coordinator in place by then? Because if they do, perhaps we'll be able to talk to them if that's the case. But so we'll see, and then eventually, we'll get down to Atlanta. We'll cover a Peach Bowl, and there's going to be. I would expect more transfer portal news after the bowl game, outgoings, incomings, offers going out. So plenty going on right now. And what we talked last week, Bob, is kind of the unofficial start of the offseason, even though you still have a game to play here coming up against Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. But a lot of news still flying around, and we'll see who they ultimately bring in as a defensive coordinator. Do you want to start there, Bob? You want to start with Manny Diaz leaving for Duke?
I think that's what the Penn State fans want to know the most about. We could talk a little bit about a former, well, he's technically still a Lion, Chop Robinson. Not going to play in the Peach Bowl. No surprise there. Good on Chop, who's still on the team, who might still either play or not play in the bowl game, but go to the draft. We could talk about all of that, but I think you're right. I think we should start with Penn State's former DC, the current Duke head coach, Manny Diaz, who it became official
Friday night.
Yep. Friday night. And let's start with what they want to know is we wish Manny well, but who might be the next DC, but also what James Franklin's plan is for the Peach Bowl when it comes to the DC.
Yeah, and you were at his press conference with Gary Stokan. What did he say? What did he say about the DC, Bob?
Did you meet Gary Stokan, the Peach Bowl CEO?
No, not Gary Stokan. James Franklin. James Franklin.
Gary's a good guy.
He is a good guy.
I enjoyed talking with him. He was really, really good. There was lots of Chick-fil-A up there in Beaver Stadium after the press conference on Monday morning. But
jealous I missed out on that.
Yeah. It wasn't surprising what he said. They are still. James is still working on the DC hire, and he basically said, "Hey, look, we're probably going to handle this the way we handled the OC job down the stretch after James fired Mike Yurcich right after the Michigan game. And what he did was he handled it internally." He just basically said Ty Howell and Jaywan Sider, Penn State's tight ends coach and running backs coach respectively, who James really, really appreciates the value to the team, not only coaching up the players but also recruiting. They were the co-OCs, and I think James was mixed in there some as well. He's going to do the same thing for the bowl game. I would be surprised if Anthony Poindexter is not calling the defense in the Peach Bowl. He's been a DC before. He was at UConn. He's got the title co-DC at Penn State at the start of the year. When he was at Purdue, he was a co-DC as well. He might mix some Terry Smith in there too, because I know James trusts him. But I think Poindexter's probably going to call the defense. It's a nice problem to have if you're the defensive coordinator, getting caught up to speed with some of the athletes Penn State has. But even I think if the DC is hired before the bowl game, and it probably will be, he'll probably just do what Andy Kotelnicki's doing right now. Observe, kind of get to know the team. I don't think he's going to have a role in the bowl game.
Yeah, Anthony Poindexter is the name to know there from an internal standpoint, not just in the interim, but as a potential promotion, a potential replacement for Manny Diaz. Anthony Poindexter, the safeties coach, co-defensive coordinator at Penn State. It's not like he was calling any of the plays over the last 2 years. Manny Diaz, that's his job in not only dialing up and designing Penn State's defense, but setting the tone for what they've been over the last 2 years, which has been disruptive, aggressive, a lot of fun to play in for everyone at every level. But Anthony Poindexter has been so integral and important from the secondary standpoint. Mm-hmm. We've seen the safeties over the last 2 years make a lot of plays in this defense, and there's a lot of respect within the Lash building with the players and the coaching staff for Anthony Poindexter. So I think he will get consideration for this open job now that Penn State has. My question there is, he's had some DC experience in the past. You mentioned at UConn, co-defensive coordinator at Purdue, but is this one where James wants to go outside the program, knowing what's at stake in 2024 with a potential Big Ten title push, college football playoff push with the 12-team playoff opening up, no Michigan on the schedule, like everything that goes into next year with a lot of talented players in their third and potential final year within the program? Do they go outside the program to hire Manny's replacement, his successor? And I think there's a lot of names out there. You look at maybe Tom Allen from Indiana, head coach there. Penn State and James Franklin has hired fired head coaches to become their defensive coordinator. Look at Manny Diaz. He was a defensive mind before that. There's a couple of other names out there as well. Not necessarily reported, but speculative names that make a lot of sense. I wrote about that last week on PennLive. If you guys want to go check that out if you haven't yet already. But whoever comes in and replaces Manny, Bob, we both like Manny as a person, just as a guy to deal with, from a media interview standpoint and everything else. But man, like those guys played for him over the last 2 years, and you could sense it at practice. You could sense it, after the Michigan State game, with defensive players coming off the field, celebrating with Manny, celebrating with Anthony Poindexter as well, who stuck around outside the locker room, high-fived everyone going in after that Michigan State win. So we'll see where they go, but whoever they hire will be replacing a coach that Penn State, I think, has been fortunate to have over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I think that if it's every once in a while James has promoted from within. Ricky Ronnie, when Joe Moorhead left after the 2017 season, he didn't waste, I think, a lot of time. He promoted him from within. It's happened, Bob Shoop was technically the DC when James got here, although Brent Pry was listed as co-DC. Bob Shoop called the plays, and Brent just slid into that role. Yeah. I don't know if it's quite that situation, but what I do think though is if it's going to be somebody on the staff, it will be
Anthony.
It would be Anthony, but I do think you can't necessarily replace a DC like Manny Diaz, because you can say what you want about how Miami, when he came from Miami as the head coach, you could say what you want about the 21-15 record that he had at Miami, but when he was just the DC at Miami, he did some really impressive stuff, I think, the 3 years before that. And I think James is not gonna shy away from that. I think what Penn State was good at the last 2 years is what Manny Diaz was good at when he was the DC at Miami, and I think he's gonna look for a guy that's really known for being disruptive, takeaways, pressure, quarterback sacks, up the field, very disruptive. It's really hard to get stops in college football anymore with the way that the rules are for the offense. But you can change a game on one player. You can affect a drive with one big tackle for loss or sack. He's going to be looking for a guy that everywhere he's gone, it's been a disruptive defense. That's what James wants. He has the athletes to do that. So whoever is going to come in is that you're going to see on his resume, I think, a guy that's really been disruptive and has really been doing a lot of the things that Manny did at Penn State. Now, there's only one Manny Diaz, but there are plenty of DCs out there that are maybe similar minded, and I think that's what James is in the market for.
Yeah, definitely. And just to build on that from a statistical standpoint, last year Penn State led the country in pass breakups. This year led the country in sacks, third in the FBS in tackles for loss. Those are the kind of plays that can change a game, and that's what Penn State's defense brought to the field time and time again over the last, 25 games? The last 2 years. And so they'll want to stay consistent with that, because not only is that a winning formula from a defensive standpoint in today's college football, but you've also recruited players to play within a scheme like that over the last 3 years, and looking forward into the 2024 and 2025 recruiting classes. And so I think that's a good point you made on a philosophical level of what they want in a DC. It was interesting when James was talking about the offensive coordinator, what he wanted before he hired Andy Kotelnicki to come over from Kansas. And he said that he wants someone to be kind of the head coach of the offense. He also wants someone that has a long and big body of work, very large sample size, where it's not just 1 or 2 seasons that they had an explosive offense, thanks to a really good quarterback or a really good wide receiver or running back. And defense, it's kind of harder to do that, kind of harder to just have a really good defense because of one player, but it happens. There are explosive players that will go in the first round that can just change a defense. And so I think what James is going to be looking at, if it's not Anthony from an internal standpoint, if he's going external, he's going to be looking for a defensive coordinator who has done it not only at multiple stops, but over the course of multiple years. And so we'll see who that ultimately is. Normally they're pretty quick about this, and we know from talking to James over the years, he always has a list for seemingly every position or every coordinator spot that he could potentially lose someone. And this certainly was not a surprise that Manny Diaz left, because it was understandable, it was understood, not only within the program, but outside the program, people covering Penn State and, fans and everyone. Manny wanted to be a head coach again one day. When he got fired from Miami pretty unceremoniously, and Miami did not handle that the right way at all. Yeah, Manny obviously put his nose to the grindstone, went to work at Penn State and did a great job and was committed to Penn State for 2 seasons. But I think he always had an eye on being a head coach again one day, and then this is an opportunity at Duke. We'll see how he does. But yeah, so.
Real quick, I'm glad you brought up the Miami experience. Is it a coincidence now that he's at Duke and they might be seeing Miami, in the next couple of years when Manny can kind of get his program in place at Duke? It won't be easy because Duke's a hard school, I think, maybe to get. I don't know that they necessarily recruit the same way on the football field that a lot of schools do, because it's a little bit more challenged academically. And
it's a basketball school.
Yeah, it's a basketball school. But I do think, though, that when Duke plays Miami, I'm sure that's a game that Manny's never gonna. That's gonna be an interesting game to see him coach, because I'm sure, like you said, it was not handled well, and he's gonna get a chance to maybe reintroduce himself, I think, to the Hurricanes program that really is a program that, despite there were some. It's kind of struggling a little bit. It hasn't gotten a lot better, I think, since he left. And I'm getting real curious to watch those games over the years.
Yeah, whenever that game first comes up, I'm hoping Penn State doesn't play at the same time so we can watch. And especially that whatever that post game handshake is between Manny Diaz and Mario Cristobal at Miami. But so we'll see on that front. You mentioned Chop Robinson.
Yeah.
We talked about some of the the disruptiveness that this Penn State defense has had and has embodied over the last couple of years. I think Chop Robinson has been a really big part of that. He was named the 3rd-team All-American this week by the AP. I had him on my ballot in that slot. I think he's just been a great player for Penn State over the last few years after transferring in from Maryland. So he declared for the NFL draft. He's not playing in the Peach Bowl. Theo Johnson, the tight end, declared for the NFL draft, will play in the Peach Bowl. We'll see how many snaps he gets, Bob,
pitch
because
count.
He might be on a pitch count. James has alluded to that a couple of times of, handling players in a bowl game that are off to the NFL. They want to be with the team, but we saw with Saquon Barkley at the Fiesta Bowl in 2017 being on a snap count, and still awaiting decisions from a handful of players, really. I mean, we've talked about them already, but Olu Fashanu being the big one that could opt out, and obviously will declare for the NFL draft, a potential top 5 5 pick. But Curtis Jacobs, Kalen King, there's a long list of players, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But Chop will not be playing in the Peach Bowl. What are your thoughts, Bob? Just kind of overall, assessment of what Chop kind of brought to this defense.
Yeah, he was, if he wasn't a 5-star, he was the highest of all 4-stars. A lot of people, I think, had him as a 5-star player at Maryland. Maryland not, under Mike Locksley, not necessarily known for great defense. They put some really good individual defensive talent into the NFL the last couple of years. I think the New York Giants corner was a first-round pick, Banks from Maryland.
Deontay Banks, yeah.
Really, really good player, but it's just, and as a true freshman, it's really hard, right? No matter what, you could be a 6-star. It's really hard to impact the game physically from that position. That's a big jump, but I think he showed flashes. But he came to Penn State. I don't know if he noticed what Arnold Ebiketie did when he came from Temple to Penn State, but he made the right choice. And Manny Diaz put him to work right away, developed him. You have to give, I think, the whole defensive staff a lot of credit. But Chop, almost immediately, you could tell in that Purdue game. If you look at the stat sheet, he didn't have a lot of stats, but on that last Purdue possession, he forced, I think, a quarterback hurry that basically ended the game. He's a big game, big play player. Michigan could not handle him in that loss. That's, I think, one of the reasons why they ran 32 times in a row. Their tackles could not handle him, and he was coming off the concussion issue that I believe it was a concussion that
seemed like it.
Yeah, it seemed like it anyway. It was definitely, you could tell it was definitely something was going on upper body, and he looked real woozy in the first half of the Ohio State game. But I just think that he is what the NFL is looking for, a hybrid athlete who can impact the game. His first step, John, and the assortment of moves he had, they used him in the middle of the field in a 3 defensive end package. Guards couldn't handle him. Tackles couldn't handle him. You could speculate. I just think he is a first-round talent, and it wouldn't surprise me if he went, in the top 15 picks. It wouldn't surprise me if he went in the top 12 picks. Maybe he'll go he'll somewhere in the first round. He's going to go. You cannot afford, in the way the NFL is played now, you can't afford to pass on a talent like that in the first round. He's surefire to me. I think he's a first-round pick. If somebody gets him in the second round, they got to steal. But he is. I've seen a lot of good defensive ends during my time at Penn State. He is right up there. And I'll tell you what, Adisa Isaac is another guy that could potentially make a decision regarding. He's obviously going to go to the draft. He was a 2019 kid. There's no reason for him to come back, but he might actually play in the bowl a little bit. But even if they don't have those two guys, Johnny, I am really excited to see Denai Dennis Sutton not only in the bowl game, but next year. And Jameel Lyons is another guy I think that is about ready to go. Zariah Fisher, I think, has really made big strides. To lose 2 talents like Chop and Adisa Isaac and still look at next year's defensive end room and go, boy, they're going to be really tough to block. It speaks to how James has recruited at just about every position. But if you're a DC, you want to come to Penn State and coach this group because you look at defensive end, you look at the linebackers, you look at the secondary, you look at a player like Kevin Winston and some of the corners they have got coming back, Cam Miller at the very least, some young players they like, Tony Roas is a linebacker, Abdul Carter. I mean, what coordinator wouldn't want to make? I think that to be the defensive coordinator at Penn State, I think is an upgrade that just about, James talks about lateral moves. You don't want to lose a guy. I think any DC in the country would want to come to Penn State almost and coordinate this defense.
They're going to pay you too.
Yeah,
they're going to pay you. I mean, we saw the reported figures what Andy Kotelnicki is going to make as the offensive coordinator for Penn State. I believe it's a 4-year deal. The CDT and the Athletic had these figures where it's 1.6 the first year, and then it goes up to $2 million per in 2027. I guess it would be his 4th year. So you would think that a defensive coordinator is going to get that kind of money. And look, they're going to have a lot to work with still, even without Chop, assuming Adisa goes as well. Adisa really made himself some money this year, coming off of a really serious injury that cost him his 2021 season. It felt like even last year, the first half of the year was just about him knocking the rust off and getting comfortable again, playing a lot of snaps a game and starting it and being an effective disruptive player, and he's been all over the ball this year. So losing those two players, assuming Adisa goes to the NFL, that is a lot to lose, because even statistically, you look at what Chop brought. I think he's 17 and a half tackles for loss in 22 appearances. And honestly, it could have been way more. Yeah. You look at the speed, the burst, like you mentioned, off the edge, his explosiveness. Like, even when he wasn't making the play, he was affecting it. He was creating sacks and creating TFLs for other players. And so they're losing a lot in Chop and Adisa, but I am really fascinated to see what Denai does. Former 5-star player. You've seen flashes of what he could be. Zariah Fisher, I think, is a rotational piece, has been really nice. You mentioned Jameel Lyons, a true freshman from Philly, burned his red shirt this year after Chop and Amin Vanover went down at Ohio State, and he was needed to fill in, and I thought played well. Amin Vanover, who had 4.5 tackles for loss last season, this year bitten by that injury bug. But a talented guy nonetheless. And so I think their DN room is still in a good spot, especially with Dion Barnes coaching that group. They play for him. He's a good recruiter, knows what he's doing. And so I think the future of Penn State's defense is very bright, even though we don't know who the defensive coordinator is going to be. You kind of trust that the talent that they have and the reputation that they have over a multi-year period under James Franklin, through 10 years of his tenure, that they're going to be able to attract a really good candidate to come in and call this defense.
Yeah. Johnny, a couple things still to get to here on the Blue-White Breakdown. It's December 12th. It's going to be a busy next 3 weeks for James Franklin, his program, his assistants, and his players, obviously. Just wanted to, before we get to, I know you're going to be doing a lot of stuff on signing day, but I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Before we get to that, though, the tight end room, because Theo Johnson is going to play in the bowl game, but that'll be his last game. I don't see a world in which Tyler Warren is coming back to Penn State. He actually might make a decision about what he's going to do, whether he's going to play in the bowl game or not. But between the two of them, Penn State has had, I would say, better tight ends at Penn State during the James Franklin era. When you talk about Freiermuth and Mike Gesicki, but I don't know.
Brenton Strange too.
Brenton Strange, yes.
I know he's your guy.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for putting that up. I don't know though. Other than maybe last year a little bit, to have two tight ends play the way that Tyler and Theo did. Theo more in the passing game. I think Tyler maybe a little bit more all the way around. But, they move on from Warren and Theo Johnson. That's something I think a lot of people are going to be talking about in the offseason. I know they have some young players in the system that have a lot of ability. There's also a player like Khalil Dinkins, who every time, I think he had 2 touchdown catches on 3 passes, and we wonder why we didn't see him more. I'm sure there's something to that as well. But I just think it's going to be a different-looking tight end room, and I don't know that you can pencil in their top 2 tight ends next year for 13 combined touchdown catches. I think this is going to be interesting to see not only what Ty Howell, the tight ends coach, does in the offseason, but also Andy Kotelnicki, how he kind of uses the tight ends, because they don't 6'6", 260-pound tight ends that can really make an impact in a variety of ways. They don't just kind of grow on trees, and that was really kind of a strength, I think, for Penn State, especially the last 2 years.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at Khalil Dinkins, I think that's the first name that would come to the minds of many when you talk about tight ends who could step up in place of Theo, and assuming Tyler Warren, who I said Adisa made himself some money this year. Tyler Warren really did too, especially in the red zone. How strong he was at the catch point. I think NFL scouts and GMs and coaches are going to look at that tape and really like what they saw from Tyler Warren this year. But yeah, you look at Khalil Dinkins from Pittsburgh, working in as that number 3 tight end. He was in the T formation a lot this year, utilized in the red zone, some 4th down conversions. He's a guy that a lot of players and coaches have talked up, not only throughout the season, but in the preseason. It was kind of it was kind of forecasted that he would be this number 3 tight end for Penn State, and you would expect him to take another jump. A player to keep an eye on who hasn't really played a whole lot this year to maintain his red shirt is Andrew Rappel, a really highly regarded tight end out of the Boston, New England area, 2023 signee, one of the best tight ends in that class. I think they've liked what they've seen from him in practice. Just you don't want to burn his red shirt if you don't have to, and they haven't had to. So I think Andrew is one to keep an eye on. And then looking forward, even if you're looking for a freshman in the 2024 class, to break out, Luke Reynolds is arguably the best tight end in the 2024 class, and so assuming he's all good and he signs, puts pen to paper, sends in the NLI next Wednesday. He's a potential breakout candidate if we're talking about true freshmen that could come in and make an impact. So they're still recruiting really well at the position, but yeah, like you said, Bob, it's going to be interesting to see how Andy Kotelnicki wants to use the tight ends, and ultimately if they're able to get to a point where what Theo and Tyler did this year, and I even thought they could have been involved even more earlier in the year, and what Brenton did, and like you said, Gesicki, Freiermuth. There's a lineage of tight ends at Penn State, and I do think they have the talent to keep that going.
Yeah, Freiermuth also a Massachusetts recruit, right? From the Boston area. So there's a little bit of a recent history there that if Andrew can be, I'm not trying to put any pressure on him, but if whatever's in the water up there, that might be a good sign. Andrew was blocked this year, right? It was going to be tough to get on the field as a true freshman in this tight end room, and Pat was able to play right away as a true freshman in 18, actually at the expense of Zach Kuntz, but he was that good. So we'll see what happens, Johnny, at tight end. I wanted to say, so two things for our audience, just to look forward to. I know we're both very much looking forward to Friday's Bowl Media Day, especially because we're going to get a chance to talk to the new OC and just kind of get a feel for a little bit of what he's like, what his personality is like, what he has to say. It's hard to believe in 10 years it's his sixth OC, James Franklin's sixth OC. It is what it is. I think it'll be the third permanent DC when he does hire somebody. But we're looking forward to talking to him. And Johnny, I just wanted to get your thoughts, just an overview of for the Penn State fans that have really been maybe haven't heard anything of late. Just signing day in general, kind of where Penn State's class sits. Do you expect them to be busy, or is this more of James Franklin and his assistants just kind of reassuring everyone and making sure there's not going to be any surprises? Because James traditionally has been pretty good. They don't get a lot of late surprises that are bad news. Maybe they'll get some good news, but he and his staff have been very good about keeping classes intact overall.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more of the latter. Like you said, is it going to be crazy, or is it going to be more just reassuring guys? I mean, they already have 25 players committed in the 2024 class. It ranks 13th nationally on 24/7. A lot of high-end players. I mentioned Luke Reynolds, Quentin Martin from Bell Vernon, the really talented running back. You have your quarterback already in tow, in Ethan Grunkmeyer, who works with Brad Mendler, the personal quarterbacks coach of Drew Aller. So there's no reason to worry there that you might get a school come in and try to flip him late. I think a lot of these guys are pretty secure in their Penn State commitment. It's signing day, right? So you never know until you get that official word in, and James Franklin is the first one to say it, right? Like you never always know 100%. That's why they always go nuts whenever they get those players on FaceTime on signing day, and they're all official and they're all in. But I would expect a lot of official words coming in, early Wednesday morning, like 7 a.m., 7:50. It's going to be an early morning for everyone. So I think that this class, though, is in a really good spot. And I think that's why, not only over the next couple weeks, but even after the bowl game, you're going to see some fringe players on this Penn State roster currently enter the portal, because you have to make space on your roster for a really talented recruiting class that's coming in. You have to stay at that 85 scholarship limit. And so I think there's going to be a handful of players. A couple have already entered the portal. There's going to be even more that kind of see the writing on the wall after those tough conversations that they have with James Franklin and their position coaches.
All right, Johnny McGonigal, in the last 30 seconds here of the Blue-White Breakdown, I know you already wrote about it. Penn State actually added a player in the transfer portal, a smaller college standout offensive lineman, What are the cliff notes just about him? We're going to find out more about him, I think, in the coming days. But just your thoughts on that ad.
Yeah, just a Cliff Notes version on Alan Herron. He's a sought-after offensive tackle, D2 guy from Shorter University. I believe it's in Georgia. He committed to Penn State. He visited campus over the weekend. He visited Texas Tech the weekend before, was slated to visit Clemson, also had offers from Auburn, Miami, Virginia Tech, Louisville, Maryland, NC State.
All right.
So it's a pretty good list, especially for a D2 guy. I mean, he's got the measurables you want, 6'6", 310 pounds at offensive tackle. Is he going to come in and start right away, assuming Olu Fashanu goes to the NFL, and who knows, with Caden Wallace at right tackle,
yes.
He hasn't made a decision yet, or at least hasn't publicized a decision yet if he's going to leave or come back for his final year at Penn State. You've got Javen Williams in the system there.
Yes.
You got Drew Shelton in the system. And so there's some young talent there, but I think Alan Herron at the very least can come in and provide some depth for Phil Troutwine's room. And yeah, when you have an offer from Clemson and from obviously from Penn State, and you're a D2 guy, you're doing something right. And so I think this guy has, it's kind of that raw potential that Phil Troutwine and Penn State are looking for.
Yeah, who else was also from the Georgia area was Hunter Norzad. He played in the Ivy League, but he was a Georgia schoolboy star. So I'm not trying to connect the dots or put any pressure on this guy because Hunter was really, really a great addition. He was an Ivy League standout, but they don't always fire at this level. I thought under the radar player at Penn State the last 2 years, helped at guard last year where he started, center this year, second team All Big Ten, deservedly so. So hopefully there's a Georgia angle to this that's going to pay off for Penn State. But it is unusual to see a Division II guy jump to this level. But I can tell you, we both know James Franklin and his staff are not going to go after a guy, nor are schools like Clemson and the like, if this kid could really play. I'm anxious to see what he can do short-term and long-term. Johnny, I'm also anxious to see you up at Bowl Media Day on Friday. Then it's going to be signing day. Then I'm even more anxious to see you in Atlanta before the game.
You talk about a Georgia angle. You got the Peach Bowl coming up, Bob.
It's like, is it serendipity? I don't know what it is, but it just seems like Georgia, it's coming up, bros. Norzad, this guy, I think a Penn State win in the Peach Bowl, it's kind of where I'm leaning right now. We'll see. We got to hear from Lane Kiffin. But Johnny, good talking with you. We will be back. We'll be back very soon to talk more about signing day, Bowl Media Day. You guys stick around. Have a good holiday. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.